Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today to learn about pollinating plants and pollination in a school garden. I'm very excited to be here today with Eliza Lawrence, who is the school garden coordinator from the Regional Environmental Council, who I love to work with often. And I'm very excited to get to meet Erin Severins for the first time today, who is a fifth grade teacher, math and science teacher in Worcester Public Schools. And so I'm going to just be turning off my camera and you're going to hear from Eliza and Erin. And if you have any questions at all, the chat is open to ask them information, and we'll have some time at the end for questions, but please pop them in the chat as you have them. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And we will be sending the recording and the slides out as well after this webinar.
Awesome. You can go to the next slide. Um, so I'm Eliza. I work for the REC, the Regional Environmental Council in Worcester, Massachusetts. We have three main programs. I think I'm going to start by just talking about what we do, a little bit about how we got involved in adding pollinator gardens, and then Erin's going to take over and talk about how she integrates the learning from the gardens into the classroom. So, yeah, the Regional Environmental Council, our mission is to bring people together to create a just food system and to build healthy, sustainable, and equitable communities in Worcester, Mass, and beyond. We do that through three main programs. So, we have our Youth Grow program, which is our youth employment program. We have a 3/4 of an acre urban farm outside where we grow food, and kids do a year-round program, but specifically 6 weeks in the summer where they're growing all the food, selling it to our farmers markets, and our farmers markets go to 16 stops throughout the city. We have mobile markets. We have two standing markets as well. And then our You Grow program, which is what I work for, and that is the school and community gardens. So we have about a little over 80 school and community gardens together, about half and half, 45-ish community gardens, 40-ish school gardens. And our community gardens are what you think of when you think of a community garden. So maybe they're in a neighborhood, but sometimes they're also, we call them more like institutional gardens. So they're at senior centers or housing developments. And the clients or residents of those neighborhoods or those communities can use the garden. And our school gardens, there's about 40 of them, and we give them a little extra love and support. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so the goal of the School Gardens program is to increase access to and use of the garden spaces and garden-related education for students and educators and families. And this photo is actually taken at the Goddard School Garden where Erin works. Yeah, schools can be an equalizer to those who don't have access to land or not enough space for full growing um, in their yards. And so we typically do raised beds in Worcester because our soils are heavily contaminated with lead and other things because we're in a very industrial city. But students still get the hands-on experience. And of course, some school gardens are bigger than others. Some of ours are really great and really wonderful and big like Goddard, and some of them are a couple of raised beds on some pavement, and that works too. You can go to the next slide. So we provide direct resources. So we help schools build beds, get grants for the beds. We provide all free plants. So in the spring we give, in the fall we give out seeds, and then in May we give out seedlings as well. So more summer heavy crops. But all schools in our network get free seedlings and free soil compost delivered, coordinated through the city of Worcester, which is a really invaluable resource. They also get access to tools, and we do offer in and out of classroom workshops. We offer field trips to some sites on our urban farm, and we do some after school clubs as well. When I began, I think 10 years ago, there were like 19 schools, and now we've grown to 40, and it's really awesome to see so many schools get excited about it, especially there was like a big post-COVID boom for school gardening. So uh, you can go to the next slide. I think this is just some cute photos. Kids on our farm doing a mini farmers market. Some photos from field trips. So you can go to the next slide. We also work with all the Worcester Head Starts, and many pre-Ks in the city. So we see a lot of early childhood we do a lot of work with early childhood, but we also maintain gardens. We do pre-K through high school. So, and we maintain gardens at like Curls Inc. and the Ecotarium and locations that aren't specifically at schools, but the gardens are educational gardens, or we're working with kids there. Um, and how this relates to pollinator gardens is that most schools struggle with summer maintenance, and also we need to switch up the variety of things that we offer to be less summer focused. Because when I started, we mostly grew peppers and tomatoes and eggplant, and it was all wonderful, but it was all things that we planted the end of May, and then kids didn't really see growing throughout the year, and then we harvested it in September, October, and then the garden was sort of done. And so it was really hard. We needed to sort of consider what we were planting, and make it more useful to classrooms, and the flow of the school year. So you can go to the next slide. This is where Worcester Native Plant Initiative got involved. So we were just beginning to add pollinator gardens. We were, adding perennials and herbs and flowers and fruit trees and things that were expanding the year of our garden in the schools. Um, and we were considering adding pollinator gardens, but we didn't quite know where to start, and we didn't have a whole lot of experience or expertise. So we got involved with Worcester Native Plant Initiative in 2002. Um, and they were so integral for our learning, but also just offering educational resources to the community and saving seeds and building pollinator gardens all across the city. Um, so Nikki, who is in the bottom left photo. She's the shortest one there. She also owns her own farm called Lady Fern Farm, where she grows all native plants and perennials. And so we were able to learn from them, but also buy our plants from them and then put them at schools around the city. And they do a lot of work around educating around native plants. So a lot when we started our pollinator gardens, we were like, oh, we'll just put in some flowers and those will be pollinator gardens. And it was really good to learn more about what types of plants we're putting in and why we should be incorporating native plants. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the coming slides. But that's who we use in Worcester. We work with a lot of nurseries in Worcester, but also um, a lot Lady Fern Farm a lot. We also have Bigelow Nursery, but depending on where you are in the state, there's some really great nurseries all over. I know in Western Mass there's Wing and a Prayer Nursery, which is a wonderful spot. Um, in Eastern Mass, there's the Trustees City Natives. They have a lot of great things. So depending on where you are in the state, there's usually a nursery where you can buy some native plants from. And I'll send resources at the end with some of these locations on them. So you can go to the next slide. So why pollinators? So wanting to incorporate more diverse plants into the school garden came from just like a genuine need to expand what we offer to be less summer focused and more year round. But we also wanted it to be a learning experience. So things that we've learned over the years is one, our summers are really unpredictable and schools are empty. So we don't know if the tomatoes and the peppers and the eggplants are going to survive. So we wanted to plant some things that would survive. Pollinators, but specifically native pollinators, are often drought or rot resistant. So they have deeper roots, they don't need as much maintenance, and they're a lot easier to maintain. So if you do have a garden at your school and there's no one there over the summer, these are some great plants to put in your garden. And then expanding what we consider food and planting something for both us and the pollinators. We uh, have kids love trying things in the garden. So we can respond by growing things that will like stick around, being flexible with our diets, being open to trying new things. We've made like sun tea with anise hyssop. We've like looked at the parts of the echinacea and talked about herbal remedies. We grow a lot of bee balm in our pollinator gardens, which smells like bergamot, which is used in Earl Grey tea. So it's just kind of a fun conversation opener. Also, we'll plant sage and oregano in our pollinator gardens, even though those aren't necessarily native plants, but just because the bugs love them, but also because they're perennials too. And it's kind of fun to have a pollinator garden that's both edible for us and the insects. I think at the Goddard Garden, we even have like lemon balm in there, and it's just fun for kids to be able to like touch and taste and smell, and it's good for the bugs too. So yeah, so expanding what we consider food, attracting more pollinators to help with our veggie garden. So if you do have a vegetable garden, adding a pollinator garden to it can only help. Um, and then climate resilient gardening in small spaces. So not all of our students have backyards, but teaching even in the small spaces we do have helps to sort of reinforce that each patch of land can have a benefit to the world around us. And by planting one pollinator plant on a median, it can help a whole community of insects or animals. We can teach about the loss of topsoil, decreasing our carbon footprint. I think one time I was setting up for a program with Erin's class actually, and they were learning about weather and floods. And it was kind of a cool connection as to why we need like deeper tap roots, which hold more water and make us more resilient to the things that the climate is going to do in the coming years. So it's a great teaching tool, our pollinator gardens and native plants in particular. You can go to the next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about what native plants are and then kind of how we build our pollinator gardens, which aren't always just with native plants. But I love this segment here, which I learned from Lady Fern Farm and Worcester Native Plant Initiative, because I just think it's some fun information, but also it's fun for the kids to learn too. So we'll teach about this as well. So native plants are plant species that are naturally found in your region. They've co-evolved with the native wildlife over the course of thousands of years, and the two depend on each other for survival. So I always tell the kids, it's not native necessarily to Massachusetts because these plants were here before we had state lines, but maybe a lot of these plants are New York and Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Um, and native means something different everywhere you go. So in some places, coconuts are native or tamarinds or mangoes. And I think it's always fun to have the kids shout out, like, what's native where you come from, or what do you think is native? And we don't want to shame non-native plants either because I'm a huge fan of mangoes. But some people are really hardcore when it comes to this stuff. And I always say you should have a healthy mix of both. So in our gardens, we try and do like 70-30. Like maybe we do mostly native plants, but then we also have other things that are just fun and pretty and edible, like lilies or something. But as long as the non-native plants aren't invasive and strangling out the stuff like um, garlic mustard and Phragmites, which we'll learn in the next slides, and you're planting, a mix of things, I think we're good. You can go to the next slide. So invasive plants. So the U.S. Forestry Service defines invasive plants as non-native or whose introduction causes to or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. This is a plant that I think is fun to ID because you see it all over the highway. So when I like put this up on the screen in classrooms, kids are like, "Oh, I know that one. That's everywhere." And a fun fact about this one is that the seed heads were used as packing materials on ships from Europe like 400 years ago. So they would dock and unpack the crates and toss the stuff everywhere. So that's why it's everywhere now. Um, so in Europe, 170 species of insects eats Phragmites, but in the US, only 5 species of insects eats it. So it's not really that useful here. It may have been great over there, but it was brought here and it's not really, it's taken over, but there's not that many insects that kind of need it or whose habitat it is. So um, we would need about 1,000 more years for it to potentially adapt like a native plant and for other species to co-evolve and utilize it. And in the meantime, it continues to outcompete other wetland plants. Um, so yeah, kind of bad. We can go to the next slide. Similarly, garlic mustard. If you've been in the woods like at all in the past few years, I'm sure you've seen this anywhere, everywhere. It smells like garlic. It's like kind of fun until you realize it's like really invasive. Um, It was brought to the US as a culinary herb and it's sort of just escaped into the wild and taken over the understory of forests. It's allelopathic, so it releases chemicals that hinder the growth of other plants. So it's not great in our forests. And like once you notice it, you'll see it everywhere. I'm sure some of you on this call have already know how to ID it. And it smells like garlic. I think it is edible. Might like hurt your stomach a little bit. I think you might have to like blanch it or something. So pull it if you see it, but that's another example. You can go to the next slide. Um, and so, yeah, we've all heard of declining monarch populations, and we don't see as many as we used to. But insects tend to be specialists, so they feed on and pollinate a narrow spectrum of plant life, sometimes just even a single species. So this is our monarch. So our monarch needs milkweed, And so we think of milkweed as a weed, and a lot of people pull it or just think it's kind of annoying. But actually, our monarch butterflies need it. They spend their whole life cycle on it, so it's pretty important. We like to plant it in our pollinator gardens. You can go to the next slide. There's actually lots of different type of milkweed, and they're all really beautiful when they do bloom. Um, so as milkweed and monarch butterflies co-evolved, the butterflies developed an adaptation that allows their caterpillars to feed on the plant, which many insects cannot do. So I don't know if you've ever pulled the leaf off of a milkweed and seen the sap. It's really sticky. It is toxic to most things, and most other insects can't digest the toxics, but the monarch caterpillars can. So they absorb these toxins as they feed on the leaves, and then they become toxic to potential predators. So it's this really cool adaptation where like birds hate the taste of them, predators don't like it. So yeah, that's really cool. And where there's no milkweed growing in roadsides or in wild spaces in people's yards, there's now no food source for the monarch butterflies and the caterpillars. So keep your milkweed, and plant them in your pollinator garden if you have the space. You can go to the next slide. One really fun fact that we love to, it's kind of puts into perspective like the importance of native species is, a native oak tree supports over 500 species of caterpillars, and a ginkgo, which I love and is beautiful, um, but it only hosts 5 species of caterpillars. So when you think about, actually, if you go to the next slide, when you think about uh, who needs to feed, if you have one tree, so one brood of chickadees requires 6 to 9,000 caterpillars before it leaves the nest, and they actually only forage within like a 200-foot radius of the nest. So, and they're only in the nest for like 12 to 16 days. If you think about which tree is going to give this brood of chickadees more caterpillars, it's going to be the tree that hosts 500 species as opposed to 5 species. So I love a ginkgo tree. I think it's beautiful, but I think if I was to plant one in my yard, I'd probably put an oak tree next to it just because um, they're both really important. And the same thing with our pollinator gardens. I know not all of our schools have space for big trees, but when you're thinking even on the small scale about milkweed or the different types of plants you're putting in your garden, so native versus non-native, um, it's good to have a mix of both. You can go to the next slide. Um, so this is kind of the difference. So between the pollen and the nectar, pollen sources enable bees to make more bees. Nectar sources provide fuel for adult bees and butterflies to be active. And host plants give caterpillars something to eat. So there's like 3 types of plants and I guess what am I trying to say? Like 3 types of things that you want to look for, I guess, when you're putting your pollinator garden in. We tend to think of bees as bumblebees, but those are not actually native. They're not as good at spreading pollen as our native bees are. So including plants that provide all 3 functions to as many species as possible throughout the season is critical for developing this sort of effective conservation plan if we want to support native species. Um, and there's a couple really cool websites that I will include in the resources. One is plantfinder.nativeplanttrust.org. One is Geiger Lab, and it allows your students to, if you want to poke around with it, that's great. Your students can also poke around with it. It kind of allows them to see, there's like little charts that say pollen sources, nectar sources, the bloom time of a plant, which type of bees it's supporting, if it's supporting butterflies. It's really fun to poke around, and there's this plant finder one allows you to sort of click on a region, to click on a type of plant. So if you want something edible, or if you want a grass or a ground cover, if you want a specific flower cover, a height, or if you have a specific moisture content that you're looking. So if you have a really wet spot in your yard, or a really dry spot in your yard, or you're looking for something that is salt tolerant, or if you're in an urban environment and you're getting inundated with salt in the winters. Um, So there's some cool things to look through, and I'll include those links that I think is fun when you're planning a pollinator garden, especially with your students, to start looking at and seeing what you want to incorporate. You can go to the next slide. We also like to include some sort of signage in each of the pollinator gardens we put up so that people know what's going on. We have these in different languages, but it's got a nice little graphic on the bottom that explains what's happening, how pollination works, and then a fun fact. So in this case, we say the shape and color of a flower will change which pollinators will visit, which is true and pretty cool. We like to read this book called Flower Talk, which is all about the color of a flower and who it attracts. So certain flowers attract bees, and red flowers attract birds, and that's always a really fun one to read as well. I'll include that in the resource list too. But yeah, you can go to the next slide. So, when designing a pollinator garden with your students, uh, like I said, you can incorporate native and non-native plants, but the benefits of native plants are quite high. So, I encourage you to incorporate some of those, something for the animals and something for the humans. Thinking about when your plants bloom. So, um, especially in the Northeast, our winters are, especially this winter, very intense. So, bees kind of are in hibernation or going underground or going into their hives in the winter. So we want to give them a nectar source and a fuel source as soon as they wake up in the spring, and then try to go for as long into the year as possible so that they can make it through the winter. So we want to have something in our garden that's blooming from April to October. And a lot of these resources that I'll include will kind of give you the bloom times. You can see, okay, if we're putting all things that only bloom in July, that's not really that helpful, right? We want something that's blooming from April to October. The color and shape of plants, again, it determines who's going to visit. So butterflies have like long, squiggly tongues. They need to get their tongues inside these tube flowers. Hummingbirds, they need flowers that have tubes. So uh, I think what butterfly is also like a landing pad. There's like different requirements that our pollinators have for visiting the plants. So including different colors, different shapes, um, recognizing where a garden is going. So having students like look at the site, survey the site, see if it's wet, if it gets a lot of sun, if it gets a lot of rain, and figuring out if if it's going to be a dry area, if you need plants that require a lot of sunlight, and what the conditions are. And then something to keep in mind is just like Latin names versus cultivars. I think if you're looking for instance, bee balm, come, there's a lot of different Latin names for it. One is Monarda fistulosa, that's native around here. Monarda dedema is another one. But if you go to a nursery and you see like bee balm Caribbean sunrise or something like that. I just made that up. That's a cultivar. So that's not like a it's not going to necessarily be a native version, and it's not bad to put in your garden, but it's not going to speak to the native insects in your community. So having a mix of those fun colors and things are good, but then also remembering when you're looking and you're shopping for them, you want the native name, or the Latin name, I'm sorry. So um, yeah. So sunlight, rainwater, and then also the height of plants. So when we plant, we want to think of how tall it's going to get, and we don't want to put, if we have a patch maybe this big, we don't want to put all of the really tall plants right in the front so that we can't see the ones in the back. So you want to think about how tall they're going to get when they're mature. You can go to the next slide. This is like a little list that I like to use as a starting place just because I think it provides a nice mix of things that bloom from April to October, things that produce lots of different color flowers, and things that are pretty and they do flower and they don't just kind of look like a big weed in your garden. So this is a good place to start. I like the mountain mint and the bergamot and the anise hyssop because it's all sort of smells good and it's edible. The aster is really goes really late in the season into late October. Um, Again, purple coneflower is not necessarily native to Mass, but it's beautiful and it's fun to be in the garden, the echinacea. And then we also add things like sage and thyme and rhubarb and other perennial herbs that doesn't have to be native, but uh, it's fun. So that's a starting place. I'll include that in the resources. And you can go to the next slide. So we like to sow seeds with students. So we do this in two different ways. Sometimes with like preschoolers, we'll do it, we call them seed eggs. We used to call them seed bombs, but bomb's not a great word to use with kids. And then I think we were calling them seed balls and everyone was giggling. So we've we've opted for our third option, which is seed eggs. And then we put them in little egg containers. But we have the kids use we actually use kitty litter, unscented kitty litter, and soil. And so it's a 2 to 1 two kitty litter, one soil ratio. We spray it. They get to like, mix it in their hands, smash it like a pancake. They sprinkle the seeds inside and then they ball it back up. And that's good because they can kind of take it anywhere. They can give it as a gift. They can put it outside. But if you actually want are trying to get seeds and you need seeds to grow, we like to do this seed milk jug method where you cut the milk jug, you drill holes into the bottom, you put the soil in, you spray it heavily, you sprinkle the seeds on top, you tape it up, and then you put it outside without a cap. And you do this. January and February is a great time to do this for native plants because many of them need a cold stratification period before they grow in the spring. Um, Seed eggs can be done with plants that don't need a stratification period as well, because you can just chuck them in the garden like in the summer when you want something to grow. It's just like a fun experiment. But we do also supplement with whole plants from a nursery when we have funding, but if you don't have funding or you just want to do a fun experiment, the milk jug method is a really great method. And we've grown a lot of our pollinator plants from that by just literally setting them and forgetting them. Like you put them outside in January or February, and then you don't think about them until spring. And you want to keep them moist like in May when it starts to get a little hot, but when they're about the size of your finger, maybe even less. You can take them out and you can plant them. They're pretty hardy. Um, and you can go to the next slide. This is a good segue to Erin's portion because it's her classroom a couple months ago out in the deep snow. Um, I don't know if this is going to work. I did include a video clip here. I don't know if you can hear it, but I don't know if anyone can hear that. Yeah, I don't think you can because I can't hear it, but it's them just shrieking. And giggling, and it's really cute. But yeah, it's a fun thing to do when there's not much else to do in the garden. Um, it's in January or February, it just gets you thinking about the garden for the year. So I'm gonna pass it to Erin now to talk about classroom specifics.
All right. Thank you so much, Eliza. And that is a really great segue. That's my bunch of students in my garden club. And that was our winter sowing project, which was really multiple days of fun because in the fall, we actually met and sorted the seeds and packaged the seeds. And then in January, or maybe that was February, we did the winter sowing. And it was a very high engagement activity. The kids loved it. When we went to go put them outside, we hadn't thought about the fact that the snow had been drifting up around our garden beds. So I'm not sure if it translates in the picture, but the snow drifts around the garden beds were like up to our knees. So there was a lot of shrieking involved. But I teach at a public school in Worcester. It's in a historically under-resourced neighborhood, and a lot of my students don't have a lot of access to green spaces, wild spaces, and fresh foods. So we've been incredibly fortunate to work with the Regional Environmental Council through the gardening program. And we've had a raised bed garden for, I don't even know, several years, a long time. And then maybe about 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, we started with the natives. And we've been gradually expanding our pollinator garden, which is kind of set off in a corner of our regular garden area. And it's been so amazing. It's been like, just from a teacher's perspective, it's created this beautiful space in our yard. And we're right in the middle of, like, a really urban neighborhood, and there's not a lot of enjoyable outdoor space there sometimes. But we have a picnic table. We have this pollinator garden, which is, you can actually see it in the background of the picture with the kids in it. Just a little bit of our pollinators poking out there. But it has provided this space that people really want to be in. And teachers go out there and eat their lunch in the summertime. Teachers take their classes out there in the spring to read. It has really transformed that area of our schoolyard into some place that like everybody wants to be. So just from an aesthetic standpoint, the pollinator garden has been incredibly successful for us. Um, and it also, as Eliza said, a lot of times a vegetable garden doesn't have year-round appeal. So our gardens for a lot of the time that we're in school are what you see with the students working right there, just kind of bare beds, and they plant seeds and they get to see them germinate, but they don't really get to experience a lot of the full life cycle of the garden. But with the pollinator garden, because they are perennials, even right now, there's action happening there. So we get a lot more use out of the pollinator garden than just the vegetable garden. So I'll kind of get into more in that when I'm talking about how to incorporate it into the curriculum. But yeah, the pollinator gardens have been wonderful for us. So we love them, and I would encourage anyone to have them, even if you weren't going to attempt to incorporate it into your curriculum, because of the joy that they bring you and for the visual appeal that they add to your school. But I've found for myself that they are just, it's like such a wonderful opportunity to bring like meaningful hands-on learning to the kids. And I know for myself, I'm a science and a math teacher, and all of our curriculum is packaged curriculum. You know, we have books that we read and we have tests that we have to take, and everything is standards based. You know, everything that we do speaks to the state standards. So I can find myself falling into a rut sometimes where I'm just relying on curriculum. And you see it in the kids' eyes. You know, you're sitting there teaching and they're kind of like glazed over, and they're just not making, you know, the connections. But after several years of working with the gardens, and particularly the pollinator gardens, I've kind of fine-tuned how to take the curriculum that we have and then employ it with the resources that we have in the pollinator gardens. And it was really, I put up on the screen here, there's a quote from the Massachusetts State Science Frameworks that I thought was really helpful for myself. I used to find myself getting very caught up in, well, the fifth grade standards say that we have to be working on the water cycle right now, and, you know, and get really caught up in those standards. But the standards, the science standards in particular, are our goals for what we want our students to know and be able to do. And I love this. It says it does not dictate a manner or method of teaching. So if we're keeping the science standards in our minds all the time, we can take the resources that we have, such as pollinator gardens, and incorporate them into the standards that are in front of us in a way that we might not have previously thought about. So I just put like 4 of the general standards on the screen there: the physical science, the life science, the earth and human activity, and the engineering and design. And within each of those major standards, there's so much that you can do. I mean, there's just so much. With the physical science, a lot of the elementary standards are talking about rocks, soil, erosion, how soil is formed, how rocks break down. I mean, getting to have the pollinator garden, which is blooming and functioning year round, go out there and do soil samples with the kids. You know, you can do soil tests when you're planting your garden to see which is a sandier soil, which is a more, you know, alluvial soil, which is more clay based. You can talk about how those different soils form. I mean, that's right straight from the standards and totally applicable to the garden planning. With the life sciences, that you know, it's right there, the life cycle of animals you can definitely do with the pollinators themselves, but the life cycle of the plants, germination, decomposition, it's all right there. And I know in 5th grade we rely a lot on the earth and human activity standards, and that's what we're moving into right now in the classroom. So I've been thinking about this one a lot, how we can incorporate you know, going out in the garden and measuring soil temperature and charting that and seeing how that compares to the averages, kind of incorporating climate change and how the plants that we can grow in one area might change over time because of climate change, talking about natives and how natives move. And then with the engineering and design, which is a really big one, you can have the kids be developing prototypes for like things that you need in the garden, different sizes of beds, shapes of beds. Why would this one work? Why would it not work? And just engaging in the engineering process and everything that you do in the garden helps teach them that, the system of planning and trial and error. So I kind of went through a couple of the standards specifically that I found really successful in the garden. And one of them was like the earth and space sciences. That was one I didn't talk too much about on the other slide there. But so it talks about using graphs and data, and like the garden is a hotbed of potential for graphs and data. I'm a data person, so I love it. But you could be taking the kids outside on a daily or weekly basis and measuring all sorts of stuff and gathering that data, making graphs, teaching them how to use the tools of science, rain gauges and thermometers and different types of thermometers to measure the soil or the air. You can be doing winter sowing projects and be recording your germination rates. There's just so much there. And it's like, this was such a game changer for me because I used to look at the garden as something that we did. It was great and I loved it. It was the highlight of my teaching, but I didn't really see it as part of the curriculum until I saw the garden as this like, it's endless possibilities, especially if you're looking at the standards for data collection and stuff. And then there's the life sciences, and particularly like when you're looking at the life cycles, the plants are the easiest one to do, obviously, because you're not dealing with a living organism, but I mean, not an animal, but you can see in the picture there, that was our seed sorting activity that we did this winter. So the kids were able to take a plant that had come to maturity and they were able to examine it and classify them and gather the seeds. And since then, we've done the winter sowing project where the kids planted the seeds, and now they're going to be able to watch them germinate. So they get this whole process of seeing the life cycle of a plant. Completely speaks to the state standards there, as you can see. Also, I really love incorporating like the compost in the garden too, because a lot of times it's hard to teach that end of the life cycle to the kids. You can talk about decomposers, but it's sort of vague until they can actually see material that's gone from, oh, I saw this in the garden in the fall, and now here it is in the spring, and this is fully decomposed into like organic matter that we can use. It's so helpful. And because I'm also a math teacher, this is like, ironically, I think I use the garden almost more in math than I do in science. And there's so much in fifth grade, we do a lot of measurement and data stuff in math. So, you can be calculating the volume of soil, you can be calculating the size and area of your garden beds. Again, with the science standards that rely so heavily on data, there's a lot of data and graphing in the math standards too. And really the sky's the limit for what you want to do there. In the pictures on this slide, we were fortunate enough to have an entire dump truck load of compost delivered from the city of Worcester, and it was a tremendous amount of compost. And those fifth graders had to calculate the volume of the cubic volume of that compost and then move it. It took us about 2 weeks, but it was great. It was like springtime and they had so much fun, and we were able to incorporate exactly what we were doing in math at that time into that activity. So that was great. So the biggest thing with the garden that I found the most helpful is that you can, like with the compost, when we calculated the volume of the dump truck load of compost, you can create problems where you're employing the curriculum that you're doing in the classroom on top of what you're doing in the garden, kind of bringing the classroom out to the garden. But you also have this reference point for all sorts of things that you can bring the garden in. You can incorporate word problems that talk about what you were doing in the garden, and it gives the kids more than just like a vague conceptual understanding. It gives them really like um, something to latch onto. And that kind of goes into my school in particular has a very high percentage of multi-language learners. I think it's like right now about 68% of our students speak a language other than English as their predominant language. And every year we have newcomers. And that for me has really been the magic of our gardens in particular is being able to work with our newcomer students because they're in school where they don't necessarily feel comfortable speaking. They don't always know what other people are saying. So they can end up feeling very cut adrift. And then we're able to go out to the garden and immediately they're like, I know that plant. I know I've had students who the first time I heard them speak to me directly was outside in the gardens. And it immediately they have something tangible that they can kind of invest themselves in and it helps them feel invested in their new environments. So that's been wonderful. And a lot of times I'll have students who will say like, oh, I used to grow this at my garden at my grandmother's house, and they recognize plants. It's been great. And also when you're talking about the multi-language learners, we have standards that we need to meet for their growth and education too. We in Worcester, we use the WIDA standards. And one of the big focuses of the WIDA standards are multimodality, like being able to have students show their learning and show their prior knowledge through methods other than just speaking or writing. So I really found that working in the gardens offers that opportunity for multimodality learning for them. And yeah, so that for me has really been one of the best parts of the garden experience is watching the students who might not feel like they're able to express themselves in other parts of their day, just be so invested in that. And that's all I got. We can open it up to questions.
Yay!
Thank you, Eliza and Aaron, so much. That was really helpful, and it was so exciting to hear how you are applying this in your classroom, Aaron. You had me thinking about cubic. You had me thinking about compost piles and how many how many things could go into that beyond measuring. Reducing into buckets and weight and all of that. I mean, this is so incredible. Um, and does anyone have any questions? You could put questions in the chat. It was so detailed that I don't really have any questions. Um, so we'll
Uh,
just give a minute. And Eliza, you're going to share some resources on
yeah.
where
Yeah, I
people
can
can get
also,
things.
I was just gonna poke around to this some of these sites. I just wanted to show the some of the sites that I was talking about when I was presenting um, for people. So this is the Geiger Lab. You can see the Latin name, the common name, the plant type, sun requirements, soil requirements, the bloom time, which bumblebee, and it has a little more information about the types of bumblebees that they're talking about, or the types of bees, early season, mid season, late season, and then I can kind of show the other one, which is this one, which is really fun if you're looking to sort of um, find a plant by type. So the type of color or the type of plant, so a perennial or a shrub or a fern or an edible plant, the height you're looking for, how much you want it to spread or not spread. There's like a little color coded map of your region, your landscape use, if it has attractive fall foliage or ornamental fruit, soil moisture, exposure. I just love this for if you were to build a pollinator garden for yourself or with students. I think this is like a fun site to poke around on.
And is that from the Native Plant Trust?
That is,
Fantastic. So we'll send those along as well.
yeah.
Thank you so much, you two. If there's no questions, then we'll just all head out. I'm going to stop recording unless there's any other thing you didn't tell us that you want to capture on this recording.
No, I think
All right.
I'm good.